We are absolutely thrilled to have over 190 people registered representing 93 organizations for the kickoff of our Thriving Nonprofit Sector Speaker Series, Building Blocks for Creating Greater Impact. This event combines our desire to build the capacity of our central community partners and our desire to make the centers, as you've heard me say before, more than space. Our desire to make them communities of learning, engagement, and innovation. Our goal for this series is to provide an opportunity for leaders of nonprofit, philanthropic, and government organizations to come together and explore ways to strengthen programs and confront the pressing challenges facing people in the Valley. During this series, we will focus on key building blocks needed to create impact, including theories of change, our favorites, right? Logic models, performance metrics, and most importantly, sustainable business models that promote scale. The foundation believes furthering the development of these tools is not only important for our own success, but also for the region's nonprofits, and we also believe that it is critical for helping us attract additional philanthropic support to local needs. Before I begin, let me take this opportunity to mention a couple things. First, I want to acknowledge the foundation staff that are here and in the back. If they could all stand up, I know they're going to hate me for doing this, but they are the people that really make the magic happen, and the people that you should know way more than me. Mara, our program director, who's the guiding force behind this, VD, Kenji, Tamara, Remy Ann, Sarah, they are the ones that you come in contact with on a regular basis, and they're the ones that are there to address your needs as best they can. Also want to acknowledge Alexa Colwell, who helped pull this together. Thank you, Alexa. All right, a couple quick things, because I'm going to get the signal that my time is short, but I wanted to touch on this. For those of you that may not know, the overall vision of the Sobrato Family Foundation is to build a strong and vibrant Silicon Valley business, or build a strong and vibrant Silicon Valley through business and philanthropic leadership. As a result, over the past year, my first year here, we've been creating a new community impact platform. And I'm proud to say this is the first unveiling of our new platform. So you guys are the first ones to see this. You'll be seeing more and more of it over the year, and there's some parts of it that I'm very, very excited about. And I think it's a testament to the family and the board that they were able to move in this direction so quickly. While we are maintaining our current general operating support program supporting 90 organizations with unrestricted and flexible funding, and our 3 nonprofit centers that house 73 organizations and hosted 4,900 meetings and trainings last year, the foundation has adopted this new community impact platform with the overarching goal to promote economic opportunity and mobility for residents in the Valley. I can't tell you how excited I am about that we were able to do that. Combining our funding, bringing it all together on the nuance that our primary mission is to promote economic success for residents, I think will lead the way and will help us partner and tell our story in a better way over the years to come. So, as you see from the slide, what we're going to be focusing on in the coming years, in addition to our community operating support, in addition to maintaining our nonprofit centers, are core programs in the education in the areas of education, jobs, housing, community engagement, immigration, and asset building. It is imperative that we address the economic disparity and corresponding lack of hope that it creates among far too many individuals and children in our communities. By focusing our grant making on promoting and supporting strategies designed to create opportunities and give individuals the skills they need to take advantage of those opportunities when they arise, we believe is the best way for us to achieve our philanthropic goals. In order to do this, however, and this is where you come in order to do this and make progress in these key areas, we need the help of strong nonprofit partners who have clear goals and strong plans to achieve them. We need partners who can help us measure our impact by measuring their own. And we need partners who have sustainable business plans and are eager or willing when appropriate to go to scale. All of these needs define what we're trying to do here today and define what is represented in the section called Thriving Nonprofit. So I hope this is something you're excited about. As I said, you're going to hear more about it. I don't want to take too much time today, but we're thrilled to be introducing our new look and our new platform to you this morning. So while I was coming in, and before I get to Kathy, I heard a lot of you answering the questions that were put on the screen. So I figured it was only fair for me to throw out my answers to kind of kick things off. So when I consider my organization, I'm most proud of the fact that we have shown a consistent level of support to the community by offering general operating support. We've offered it during good economic times and bad economic times, and I think it's a real testament to the family that they maintain that commitment to promoting access to essential services in the community. The second question, what one ambitious goal are you trying to advance in your organization? I think it's for us is the last program area on the slide there, philanthropy engagement. I think our ambition is to determine how to create a culture of philanthropy in the Valley, and specifically develop strategies that allow us to connect with the new and young wealth in the Valley and promote local giving. And then the final question was, name one thing you need to get you there, and I think the answer to that is clearly reflected by this room. We need your help. This is not something that we can do alone as an organization. We need to be able to communicate clear and concise, in a clear and concise manner, what we are trying to accomplish, the community impacts that we envision, and how we are moving toward those goals. If we cannot do that, we will not attract the new young wealth that we need to bring into our program. So we need you, and this is our effort to help. We need you to be clear and be dogged on your ability to look at understanding what you're doing, why you're doing it, and the impact that you're having on the community. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kathy Reich from the Dave and Lucile Packard Foundation, who has agreed to moderate our panel this morning, and we're so thrilled that you agreed to do that, and we're looking forward to a full day. I won't go through the introductions because you all have those. You have the bios for Kathy and the rest of our panelists in your packet, and we are excited that you're here, and we hope to see you at many more of these events in the future. Thank you.
I feel like Oprah, only shorter. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here today. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Rick, for that terrific introduction, and especially to Mara and Alexa for putting this together today. So I'm Kathy Reich. I direct the Organizational Effectiveness Program at the Packard Foundation. What I'm proudest of in my organization is that the Packard Foundation is celebrating its 50th birthday this year, and for 31 of those years, we have had a program that's invested in supporting our grantee partners around the world in building their management, their leadership, and their strategic impact. And today, we have two inspirational guests with us who are going to talk about the critical importance of strategic development and evaluation as building blocks for impact in the nonprofit sector. I have to admit, I've worked in the social sector all of my life. I started in government, and I moved to the nonprofit sector first about 15 years ago, and then into foundations. And when I first started in nonprofits, I thought that all of this talk about theories of change and logic models was kind of mumbo jumbo, quite honestly. I had exposure to evaluation systems and performance metrics in grad school, but I thought that if you weren't talking about randomized controlled trials, you were again talking about mumbo jumbo. But over the last decade, I have evolved in my thinking, thanks to people in large part like Fay, and I've become convinced that having a strong theory of change laying out the logical pathways by which you're going to achieve that change, and having a system in place by which you measure the progress you're making isn't just desirable, it's actually essential to running a strong nonprofit in the 21st century. And it's also pretty essential in terms of making concrete this difficult and fuzzy enterprise that all of us are engaged in, this thing called social change. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And to help us make sense of it all are Fay Twersky and Tess Reynolds. You do have their bios, so I won't go into great detail about all of the terrific things they've done. But Fay leads the Effective Philanthropy Group at the Hewlett Foundation, and she has spent her entire career helping nonprofits to measure and achieve greater impact through the thoughtful use of strategic planning, evaluation, and measurement. And Tess has built New Door Ventures from a small, kind of struggling neighborhood nonprofit into a thriving organization. Last year, they placed nearly 150 disconnected youth into high-quality jobs. She is running an organization with a budget of $6 million a year, a home to call its own building. She just completed a $10 million capital campaign. And she runs 2 thriving businesses that both employ the clients while generating earned revenue for the operation. So she has a business model that works. So Fay and Tess will tell you a little bit about their own journeys, tell you some stories, reflect on strategic development, logic modeling, evaluation, measurement, and impact. We won't talk much about business models today. We will leave that for the next session on March 19th, which we hope all of you register for. But hopefully they will demystify some of the jargon and help you assess how these practices can best play out in your own organization. And today's format is going to be highly interactive. We're going to do some polling, we're going to do some discussion, we're going to have lots of time for Q&A. So we do want to get you up and moving around a little bit. But I'm going to start with a few questions for Fay. Hello, Fay.
Hi, Kathy.
So you started in this business as an evaluator. You ran your own consulting firm for nonprofits. And you helped those nonprofits assess and enhance their impact. And now you are on the philanthropic side, and you make grants to enhance the effectiveness of the Hewlett Foundation's grantees around the world, and also to try to enhance the effectiveness of the philanthropic sector as a whole. I work in that sector too. That is a big job. Come on, guys.
Full stop.
Full stop. That's a big job. So we hear a lot about theories of change and logic models and evaluation plans. Help us sift through some of the jargon here. What do these words actually mean? Why do they matter to the day-to-day work of the people in this room? Maybe you can start at the beginning and talk to us about what a theory of change actually is.
Sure. Before I do that, I just want to say how nice it is to be here with Tess, who before I went inside working with foundations back in 2006, I did have my own firm working with nonprofits and philanthropy, and one of our clients was Tess when she was just at the beginning of her journey at New Door, and it's amazing how far she's taken it. So on a personal note, it's so nice to be here doing this.
She was a mentor in my rookie years.
So it's just a pleasure to be here. So all the jargon in the sector, the theory of change, logic models, metrics, evaluations, they're really tools in the toolbox. You know, they're the equivalent for a carpenter of hammers and screwdrivers and nails, wrenches. So you use them to help you do your work. They are tools not to be ends in and of themselves, but to be used to help you think through systematically with discipline, how's our program, how's our organization going to create change in the world. So I thought that the best way maybe for me to describe theories of change and logic models might be to use a metaphor, because Tess is going to talk about how it actually works in her organization. But as I was thinking about today and what might be a little bit interesting, so I didn't put you all to sleep in talking about theories of change and logic models, I thought I would talk about diets. So I'm not going to ask any personal questions except to say, how many of you, we're going to do really fancy polling in a minute, but just by a show of hands, do any of you know anybody who's ever tried to go or been on a diet? Yeah. So it's a pretty common thing, and we all have, either we or the people we know, have theories of change, really, about diets. So why do people go on diets? Their intended impact is to lose weight, feel healthier. Well, there's variance on that, but most of the time people go on diets to lose weight and feel healthier. So let's say I wanted to go on a diet. I want to lose weight and feel healthier, and I want to do it in a sustained way. So I don't want to just lose weight for an event that I'm going to go to in a couple of months. I want to do it and I want to keep it off, because I know I've read in the paper and the Nutrition Action newsletter that most diets don't work, and that after you lose it, you gain it back. So I think, okay, what is my theory of change going to be? And if I'm smart, I'm going to do something that unfortunately a lot of nonprofits don't do. I'm going to go to the literature. I'm going to look and see what have been the most effective diets, and is there research underneath those diets? And just yesterday, I was, not because I'm going on a diet, because I was preparing for today, I went on to a site about low-carb diets. I had done a bunch of research, and I found out actually there's many different theories of change, essentially, about dieting. There's dieting that's fasting. If you fast, you change your metabolism. Within months, you feel better. There are diets that are about raw food eating. Eat raw food. It cleanses you and it changes your habits, and just eat raw food forever. I, in fact, know people who've done that. There are diets that are low-fat diets, and there are diets that are low-carb diets. I found a diet, after much research, that basically had 3 components to it. And it had randomized controlled trials underneath it. So last night when I went onto the site for low-carb diets, the 4th line said, over 20 randomized controlled trials have been conducted in the past 10 years on this diet. So it's research, it's evidence-based. These studies consistently showed that low-carb diets cause more weight loss and greater improvements in health markers and so forth. So there's research underneath this diet. So I decide my theory of change for this diet is going to be a combination of low-carb, regular exercise, and mindfulness. Mindfulness about habits. Because I saw in another research that actually is quite important for sustainability. So that's my theory of change.
Okay, so I'm going to check back in with you in a month and see how this is going. So you got your theory of change. Where does a logic model come in?
Great question. So I've got this theory of change, and what makes it a great question is that in many cases, a theory of change can find expression in different ways in a logic model. So in my case, my choices for my logic model, which really the logic model, as you said earlier, Kathy, is really what specifies how you're going to put this into action. So my theory is one thing, it's a theory, but what am I actually going to do every day? Well, 3 times a day, I'm going to swim. So that's my exercise of choice. It might not be somebody else's, but 3 times a week, I'm going to swim. Every day, I'm going to prepare meals that are low carb, high protein, low carb, and I'm going to sign up for online guided meditation. I'm going to do that for 15 minutes every morning. I'm going to do those 3 things for 2 months, and I'm hoping to lose 20 pounds.
Okay. I got all kinds of questions now coming off of that, because now I'm thinking like a funder. Okay? And I'm thinking, I'm your funder, and I come in and I say, it all sounds great, Fay, but I think you should do the following 6 things. I think you should also hire a coach who's going to check in with you, every week and make sure you're doing all these things and see how you're doing. And I think that, we need to have metrics by which we evaluate how this is going. Are you really, how many pounds are you losing every week? By the way, I'm not going to fund any of that. How do you put together this logic plan and logic model and theory of change, decide what's in and what's out, and what you are going to do and what you're not going to do? And how do you avoid funder pressure to put stuff in or take stuff out?
There's a lot of questions you're asking all at once, Kathy.
I know, sorry.
So the one thing the funder is right about is the metrics. So it's actually quite important to have metrics, not because the funder is saying so, but why? It's important to have metrics because it helps me stay disciplined. Because what's the big problem with diets? It's like most social programs. They're hard to stay on, and it's hard, it's called, in the social science world, fidelity to the model, right? How am I really sticking with the program? Am I really actually swimming 3 times a week? Am I really eating the meals I prepared in the way that I had planned to? And am I doing that guided meditation for 15 minutes a morning when my kids are running around and I have to get out the door and all these intervening variables come in? So the question of metrics is quite important. Not to the funder, I mean maybe to the funder too, but notwithstanding the funder's interest, it should be important to me to understand if this is a worthy goal for me, then I want to be tracking my progress, I want to be tracking my activities, I want to be tracking the output, I want to be checking my own assumptions. My assumptions were, if I did these 3 things with in this frequency, with this amount of intensity, I would lose this amount of weight. And if I actually do those things and measure myself, I should see change. And if I don't, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm sneaking a little, or maybe I'm actually not doing the meditation every morning. Maybe I'm doing it 2 mornings a week. And so, if I'm not actually practicing fidelity to my model, in this case, the diet, I might not see the change that I expected to see. So, in terms of metrics, I think that is important to an organization, regardless of whether it's important to a funder. And one of the things I always tell organizations, I used to tell them this before I was inside a foundation, and I still tell them this now that I am inside a foundation, which is the best thing you can do in your negotiations with a funder around metrics is get ahead of them. So if you don't want a funder to tell you what to measure, the best thing to do, the best strategy is to tell them what's important to you to measure, and the fact that you've got a system in place that you're using to measure, measures that are important to you, that are intrinsic to your work, that you use, that you store and that you reflect upon and use to make continuous improvements. There was another question in there.
Well, okay, so my second question is about that funder pressure. The funder is telling you to put things into your strategy that maybe you don't think belong there, or take things out of your strategy that are really important to you, or measure things that you think are going to be too costly to measure or just take up too much of your time. How do you cope with that kind of pressure? Who decides what goes into a theory of change, a logic model, an evaluation plan?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. I mean, ideally the organization decides. But when you first said, I think you need a coach, I thought, great. That sounds great. I'd love to have a coach, because a coach would help keep me honest. A coach would keep me disciplined. I could make a plan to meet a coach at the swimming pool. Maybe I could even add another exercise into that. But then when you said, I'm not going to pay for it, that made me feel like, how am I going to pay for a coach? So I guess what I would say is that it's a conversation with the funder, that the funder doesn't just dictate from on high. Most don't. Some do. Certainly we all know them. Some of us have worked in them. But so there are heavy-handed funders, but most funders are just human beings, and they have a good idea. They see many more organizations often than one nonprofit might, and so they might see, oh, coach worked here and here and here. It might also be very helpful to you in an organization. And so the funder's perspective can be very helpful, because they often have a bird's eye view that the nonprofit on the ground doesn't have. But if you said, wow, I would love to have a coach, I don't know how we can afford it, that's different than just becoming a shrieking violet and saying, oh, I feel victimized by this requirement, but it's an unfunded mandate. Oftentimes the funder might be able to provide some funding for the coach, or may be able to broker a relationship to another funder who could provide that coaching, if you really thought it was a truly important add that might really help move to success in a way that without the coach might not.
So you've laid out, for illustration's sake, a pretty simple example. We all know what it takes to lose weight and be healthy. We just don't do it, right? But we know what the steps are, and we know that if you follow them, it should happen for you, right? A lot of organizations in this room are concerned with pretty complex and difficult changes, right? How do you take a kid who is completely disconnected from school and other social services and move them into employment and get them back on a ladder to success? That's a very hard change. How do you approach theory of change and logic modeling in a complex or even chaotic situation? Does it look any different, or is it really the same steps?
Asking me or Tess?
I'm asking you.
Okay.
We'll get to Tess.
Yeah. I thought I was done.
No, still on the hook.
Get the hard question. It's basic. Here's what I'll say: it's basically the same steps, but the content looks different. So when you're starting off a theory of change, you're thinking about what is my intended impact? What do I hope to achieve? Where's the problem I'm trying to contribute to solving? And it is quite important to look at what has been done before. What does the literature say? What does the research say? What has worked? What has failed? And build upon that. So lots of times nonprofits don't either have the luxury or take the time to look at the literature and the research. That does take time and it does take resources. But I do think it's critically important. So in that respect, taking the time to make explicit what is often implicit, even in a complex situation, I think is really important. The classic case of complexity that people always talk about is parenting. There's no one right way to parent. There's no one recipe for parenting. But thinking about, well, what is our philosophy about parenting? What are the what do I think is going to be a good approach to parenting? Does my partner agree with me about that approach? And then when we actually have kids, we have to make adjustments in real time. So I think there's still value in making explicit what is often implicit in programs and in life. And then, there's nothing like putting down your specific assumptions of, if I'm trying to move, these 100 kids to help them with a tutoring program from going from, reading at the first grade level to reading at the fourth grade level, what do I think it's really going to take? And why do I think that? And how many tutors and how much time and what kind of support and what's the matching that I'm going to do, and tracking that and testing it. And that is complex, but it's only through the putting down what do you think is going to happen and why, and then tracking it and looking at where you were right and where you were wrong and how to make improvements and continuous improvements, that you'll be able to actually make those improvements.
So a couple more questions for you, then I'm going to let you off the hook for a few minutes. You talked about time and how time-consuming this is and how you need to devote time to it. It also takes money. These are two things that none of us ever have enough of, time and money. So what do you say to a nonprofit CEO who says, where am I going to find the time? And I cannot find anybody to give me the money to do this.
Yeah. So that's a great question. I'm not sure I have a perfect answer, but I'll try. I mean, I think what I have seen over the years is that those organizations that bake measurement, and this is specific to the evaluation and measurement question, those who bake that in from the beginning do a better job at it, and it's cheaper. So as you're thinking about, I'm going to start this new program, I'm going to target these kids, this is the assumptions I'm making, this is the evidence underlying it. People start new programs, have programs running all the time, so stopping and articulating the logic can take some time, but it's often the measurement that is talked about as taking a lot of time and money. And I think the more you bake it in from the beginning of what are the key things that we really want to know? What are the key proxies? If we don't have to measure all the way out 5-10 years to see if these kids become productive citizens, but we know actually the research says that if we see these early outcomes, they are more likely to become productive citizens, then we can help measure fidelity to the model and these early outcomes. So you narrow your measurement requirement by drawing on research. That's one thing. Simplify it for yourself by drawing on what's already known. You don't have to reprove what the research has already shown. So research can be your friend by drawing on it and just looking at the intermediate outcomes, so to speak. That's one thing. And then making sure that you are, one of the things I always say is measure the minimum data set, not the maximum data set. And that's usually anathema to where nonprofits start. Usually when I was a consultant and I would go in to talk to a nonprofit about their evaluation work, they would say, we want to demonstrate success in all that we do. And we do a lot of things, and we help a lot of people, and we care about these people, and we want to show our board and our funders how much success we're having. And that is really a mistake. It's a huge nut to crack. It's much better to measure the minimum and grow it from there and say, wow, we see that, half these kids are improving their reading score, and the other half aren't. What else do we want to know about these kids? And be more agile in your measurement, just like you want to be in your program. So don't try to boil the ocean with your first attempt at measurement. Start small and be curious, be honest with yourselves, and grow from there. And the last thing I'll say about funders is that one of the very interesting things that we have seen at the Hewlett Foundation is that we give a lot of general operating support grants. It's one of the things the Hewlett Foundation has been known for, is to give general operating support grants, to give grants to nonprofit organizations, to let nonprofits decide how to best use their funds, not to have the funder decide project by project with this amount of overhead. But not many of those nonprofits who receive general operating support use that to develop their internal systems. So they'll still come back to us to say, well, we had to use that for our programmatic priorities. Can we have an additional grant for developing our performance management system, our performance measurement system, our evaluation approach? So it's a two-way street, I would say. I think for this to be important to nonprofits, it needs to be somewhere on the priority list. That measurement, tracking the change, are you seeing the change you expected? Why or why not? So that you're in a continuous improvement cycle. You need some measurement to do that. And that has to be a priority for you and not just for the funder. And again, if you get ahead of the funder, you'll be in better shape. You'll have something that's more constructive.
So now we'd like to have a little bit of fun with technology. Those of you who have smartphones, if you can pull them out. This is totally anonymous. Will no way come back to you. Promise. Who here has used an app called Poll Everywhere? Just raise your hand. Not very many. Okay, so this will be fun, I promise. So normal texting rates apply on this. Hopefully you're like me, you have a teen or a tween in your life and you have an unlimited texting plan. So if you would like to participate, what you want to do when I ask a question is you text a code that'll be up on the screen to 22333. That's like the phone number. You just text it to 22333. If you're on a Wi-Fi enabled device, you could also go to pollev.com/Sobrato and you can vote online using Wi-Fi. So we'll ask a few questions, just kind of get a sense of the room. We'll go to the next slide, first question. And this show up in real time, it's really fun. First, does your organization have a theory of change or an equivalent tool? You can answer yes, you can answer no, I don't know, or you're currently in the process of developing one. So far we got all yeses. So this could mean that everybody in this room is already using the tool, or it could mean that everyone in this room who is technology enabled is already using this tool. We have a few no's, a few not sure's. And by the way, if you like this tool and you want to use it for your own meetings, it's really cheap and online and easy to use. So great, and we'll close this in just a minute. We'll give people a chance to finish voting. So, Fay and Tess, is this about what you expected to see? Is this surprising in any way? It's kind of a spread.
About half have.
Half.
Yeah. That sounds about right.
Sounds about right.
Sounds pretty honest. The question of is it valuable is another question.
Yeah. Okay.
How
well,
old is it?
That's the
when was
next
the last
one.
time you looked at it?
So let's go to the next question, which is, here it comes. For those of you who have a theory of change, so looking at that 50% who actually have a theory of change developed, do you find that it is an effective tool? Is it something that sits in a binder or in a shared file and you never look at it? Or is it something you actually use and refer to, maybe even try to measure against once in a while? Ah, yes, no, maybe, not sure. Where is it again? I can't find my shared drive at work. The not sures are really not sure because they keep going up and down. All right. So I'd just be interested actually to hear from a couple of the folks who, if you are feeling particularly brave, if you answered no or not sure, is there anything about it that you think could make it more useful? Or maybe we could answer that at the end. But if anyone is feeling really brave. Yeah. No, it's the percentages change as more people join the poll. So yeah.
You gotta look
Yeah,
at the percentage.
You got to look at the percentages. So all right, well, hold on to that question throughout. Hopefully by the end of the day today, those of you who answered no or not sure, or I don't have one yet, could have at least one idea of how it might become a more useful tool for you, how you might improve it, or how you might throw it out and start over again. So third question, and this goes to some of the things Fay was saying earlier. Do you rely on a research base to inform your program work? Can you cite research, literature, trials? Is there evidence behind what you are doing? So as these numbers settle out, Fay and Tess?
Go ahead, Tess.
Well, I think my comment, I was reflecting on when I moved to the sector 10 years ago, and it wasn't that easy to get to the literature. But today, honestly, it is so easy. And, you just enter a phrase in Google and so much comes out, and it's a fraction of the time it used to take to access the literature.
I think it's surprising. So I think it's surprising how many yeses there are. So that's great for those of you who have a theory of change. This is for everybody,
Yeah.
whether you have a theory of change or not.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because we've got proportionally more people of a research base than have a theory of change. So that's kind of interesting.
That's interesting.
So you got a research base, but not an explicit written down theory of change, because the denominator still is the same.
So last question. Pop it up here on the screen. Does your organization have clear measures for your work? So yes, we have clear measures. We have some, or this is an area where we are struggling. So it seems like most of the organizations in this room are on this path, and some of them have made a lot of progress. Is this surprising?
No, I think most nonprofits, because of categorical funding streams, have to measure. So, there are often lots of measurements and tools in place in nonprofits. It's just that they aren't always that helpful. And often what happens, because of the way funding is provided, a form gets added to satisfy a new funding stream, and then another funder comes in, public or private, and another form gets added, and all of a sudden you've got this sort of Byzantine set of forms. That's often what used to happen all the time when I would consult with nonprofits. Is you'd see all the, it was still a lot was paper based. You'd see all these incredible paper forms, that didn't actually didn't seem that rational. But they always had some measures. The question is, could they be better? Could they be tighter? Could they be sharper? Could they be more useful and more value add to the nonprofit to provide information when you need it about the things you care about?
Yeah, one question we don't have here, because we're going to get to Tess now, but an interesting question to follow up here is, are you satisfied with what you're measuring, or do you use what you measure? Or do you use only what you measure? Well, thanks very much. I think that we will transition over to Tess, who has a good story to tell about how all of these concepts that Fay's described actually play out in practice in a nonprofit. So Tess, you came to New Door 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. You were a new ED. You had never led an organization before. You had never worked in a nonprofit before. You'd spent your career in high tech here in the Valley. And you walked into a small human services organization based in San Francisco that was really having some challenges, right? And some basic challenges around clarifying its mission, challenges around raising money. And if we fast forward 10 years later, you are really thriving. You just completed this $10 million capital campaign. You bought a building in the toughest real estate market in the country. You have a sharp, clear vision and a power board, and are serving clients in really powerful ways and transforming lives every day. And you're measuring it and can actually report on what you're doing. How have you done it?
Wow. She makes it sound so great. The fact is, I mean, we're always struggling, right? We're always struggling for improvement, even if I think we are in a much, more confident place about our health. So I think the first thing I want to say is that we have been all over the range of responses you've just talked about this morning. So I can totally relate. And the second thing I'd probably say is kudos to the board who hired me, because I was a newbie, and I suppose in some ways that's what gave me the courage to just ask questions. I knew from the beginning, although I had served on nonprofit boards and had volunteered, it's very different running a community-based organization. And so I knew coming in that I was a learner, and in fact when I accepted the job, I said, who's my coach, right? And so my board chair at the time agreed to meet with me every 2 weeks and be my coach. And so, but I think sometimes that's how the best questions get asked. So New Door, when I came in, was a $2 million organization with 4 legs to it. Like many nonprofits, you always want to serve more of the needs in your community. And let's be really brutally honest here. The more programs, or the more you grow, the bigger you are, the more overhead you can pay for. So when you're struggling to say, how do I find a full-time accountant or a full-time CFO, you say, I've got to grow so that I can afford that. So we had a small transitional housing program serving women out of recovery and their children under the age of 2. We had a social enterprise serving adults coming out of homelessness and justice backgrounds. We had another social enterprise, 2 social enterprises actually serving youth. And then we had a job readiness program in a local high school in the Mission. 4 very different programs with 4 different clients, and therefore inherently 4 different goals. And the organization was doing well until a lead funder decided to change its strategy. And no offense to them, this is REDF, the Roberts Enterprise Development Fund at that time was a big investor in us as a social enterprise when social enterprise was just emerging. And so for 13 years, we had this funder that was feeding the biggest part of our organization, and then they decided to change their strategy, and they have the right to do that. And we still have a great relationship with them, even if they changed their strategy. And so that became a burning platform for us. And I think, coming in as a new leader, the challenge was, okay, if the lead funder is going and I have to go out and raise more money to feed the current organization, the current programs, then what's my story? And the realization was that while we were doing evaluation work, we were doing it for REDF, and it was really their theory of change, not ours. And so what happens when they go away, right? And what's our story, but more importantly, who are we? What are we about? What do we really want to do, and how do we know that we're doing what we say we're doing? How do we know that what we're doing is really good? What promise can we make out there to these new funders we're trying to attract? And I think that sometimes organizations, because we're so busy serving clients, we think, well, who needs a theory of change? And I will confess that as a former business person, if there are any business people here on board, theory of change is not in the business sector. It's a whole new framework for nonprofits. And so I can say now it's absolutely important and absolutely useful for the nonprofit sector, particularly those providing human services. But I think that I think at that time, we had good leadership, but we thought, well, if we can tell our story and raise money with our story, why have a theory of change? And a theory of change is really different. It's, as Fay was describing, it's really our pulling things together and telling ourselves where the story may not be hanging together. And it's our story to ourselves before it is a story that meets an RFP. So I'll just pause there. And I can go on about our next phase. Do you want me to talk about how we arrived at the TOC?
I'd love to know how you developed it. So you had these 4 disparate programs all doing different things. In the process of crafting that theory of change, you made tough decisions to let some things go.
That's right? I think because what we were really measuring were our social enterprise programs, we had no comparable metrics across with the 3 other programs. And so what could I measure? Frankly, I measured human energy. I just said to the staff, if we had to focus all our energy on building something great, what resonates with all of us, and what I heard back was youth and employment. So, okay, what does it look like to be a youth employment organization? And we made some tough decisions then, like shedding our housing program. And we also converted the adult employment program into a youth program. So now we had some focus about what we wanted to build. And then we set out to build our first theory of change. And we hired BTW consultants. Fay wasn't there anymore. But we hired, and I will say nobody wanted to fund it. And we had to take money out of general operating funds. And it makes sense to me why, right? I mean, this was primarily an answer for ourselves. So we hired BTW to coach us through the simplest form of theory of change. And it was helpful at that stage. And one thing that I would say to all of you is, you can pace this according to what you have capacity for at the time. And so we wrote our first theory of change around youth development and youth employment. And that was helpful to us. It made our grant applications more crisp. We created a new evaluation system that was our own, not REDF's, using a system called ETO. We have made many changes to our TOC and to our evaluation system along the way, but at least we had that clear starting point. So when we had a new program, we could articulate what was different about that intervention compared to the other program and how we would measure it differently. So, and then 2 years later, we hired another consultant to kick the tires and help us, take our metrics to the next level, because the first time we built it, you sort of don't know what you don't know. So 2 years later, we were more ready, and we hired David Hunter to come kick the tires. And I remember it was like drinking from a fire hose. Here was this pro, had been senior program officer at the Clark Foundation, which I believe is the largest or one of the largest investors in youth development in the country. And we were these babies, right? And so when we were asking him, I told him it was a very poor consulting model because all his advice would take us 2 years to implement. There were so many good ideas, so we couldn't really bring him back until we had done everything he told us to do. But that was very helpful because it clarified for us what was really important. I think when you're in those early stages of learning, everything seems important. And again, it was a helpful investment to bring in an expert to really clarify for us, you know what, given your program, it's okay, you don't need to measure 2 years out, or you don't really need to measure that because that aligns, but you really need to hold yourselves accountable to this, or to think about continuums when the metrics were not finite. So just very helpful. And then, just to cover the ground, we have just completed our second theory of change. So the work is never done. It's a living document. But 2 years ago, we were accepted into the Clark Foundation's Propel Next grant. And I must say that all that work in the first DOC is really what qualified us to be what they call a promising organization. We're not ready to scale. That's not what Propel Next is about, but promising enough to invest in an even more rigorous infrastructure so we can be ready to scale. So we redid our theory of change. We're redoing our evaluation system. My data and evaluation specialist is here right now, which means he's not overseeing the transition to our new system. And it's a big deal, right? Because we're going to have data both. And see, learning is important in our organization. But we know more now. We're actually excited about changing the system because we know more, and we have that coach that we couldn't afford before. That we have the Clark Foundation paying for a coach every step of the way to take us to the next level.
So one of the things I love about your story is you talk about this as a process that's never done. Can you give me an example, maybe in those early years when it felt so hard and so uncertain, of a time when you had this first theory of change and you had to adapt it or adjust it based on what you were learning? Because it is just a theory, right? It's not set in stone, and it's not the whole universe.
Right. I think so. Fay talked about dieting, and I talk about cooking, which is probably the opposite end at New Door. But I always say, in those early days of cooking your prize heirloom recipe, you're learning what makes it special. And then at some point, you know all the secrets, right? And it's not just about what we call components and dosage. It's not just the ingredients and the amount of those ingredients. It's also how you string them together and in what order, and what do you dial up, if somebody likes it a little more spicy, or, things like that. And so for us, I think in the beginning, we thought chili was just beans and chili powder and, whatever your analogy is. And today we just have a richer understanding of the work, and we understand all the more ingredients that are available to us, but we have matured enough to know we can't change the entire recipe overnight. So we've become more intentional about our hypotheses. We're trying to develop learning agenda across my staff. What are the key questions you really want to have answered? And then out of those, what are the one, maybe two questions that really deserve a hypothesis that we're going to test and measure through this year? So last year we said, what if we did our ally program for 6 months instead of 4 months? What would that do to outcomes? And then we compare. So we do our own internal trials, and we say, well, what did we learn, right? Or let's slice and dice the data and better understand. For youth who don't have a high school diploma, we can now see that their attachment rates to jobs are significantly lower than youth who come in with a high school diploma. Well, we sort of knew that, but the data didn't really help inform that decision day to day. So now we can see how we can dial up that number, first by just managing fidelity to the model, like you said, Fay. So case manager 1 might be, his outcomes might be lower than case management 2. Well, it's not punitive about failure. It's like, what can you learn from the guy across the table from you who's doing better with his youth's educational outcomes? You know, you guys share some knowledge, and then there's a whole new programmatic intervention that we might do, like a new workshop or a whole new academic program, and that's different than, you know, just having fidelity to the current model.
So one last question for you, Tess, and then we're going to do some discussion amongst yourselves. But when you first started, the questions that were keeping you up at night were pretty fundamental. It's what's this organization about? What's our primary mission? Which are the programs that we should keep, and which are the programs we should let go? What are the questions that keep you up now?
Well, I think this whole idea of scaling, it's driven less by funding and more about the fact that we really, really care about the young people we serve. This disconnected 17 to 21-year-olds they're disconnected from jobs and education and the social supports they need to make that transition to become independent adults. And it's not a very cool problem in our country, right? I think most of us would rather ignore it. It's not a very mature problem, so the sort of government funding and institutional funding hasn't fully aligned to help make this transition yet, and in a way we're part of the pioneers in demonstrating the data to invite more funding to this. And so what keeps me awake is we as a country need to scale this problem, and what's New Door's role in a way that's appropriate, because we're not a youth advocacy organization. And so we're always, you know, so many people around the country want to come and learn, but we're not a teaching organization, and we really need to do our work really well. I get invitations to move, you know, to East Palo Alto or San Jose, and it's like, well, first we really need to do this work well, so that when we, you know, if and when we establish a teaching position, how do we do that? You know, knowledge sharing is all good, but it costs resources. And then who's going to pay for all of that? Right? Because we don't want to be, again, distracted by the new fun things to do and then neglect the core that really is now so data driven that it's what can be scaled as opposed to the new. I think, and by the way, you know, I think one of your foundations funded the White House report on the economic impact of opportunity youth. And it says that each of these youth, if we don't intervene, will cost our country $940,000 over their lifetime. That's our taxpayer and social costs, and you know, I mean, that's what it will cost this country if we don't intervene. So for us, that's just such an imperative. I think the other question related to that, I was hinting because it's so much in my mind now, is education. That we're doing this primarily through jobs with some education support, and the more we look around, the more literature we read, the more we look at best practices around the country, we're finding this huge gap around options for our population of youth on how to connect to post-secondary education. And it's because it's a huge problem. And so, you know, right now we're gathering the data, we're trying to come up with what the right strategy is and hopefully attract the funding if we decide to do it. To say, should we add this service versus just continuing to offer more jobs to more disconnected youth?
It sounds like the process of developing a theory of change and logic modeling has been incredibly helpful to your organization in terms of clarifying what you will do, but also clarifying what you won't do.
Correct.
And where you fit in a system of nonprofits and advocates and service providers and researchers who are all working on a very big problem.
That's very true. For instance, we've been approached to create a new program just for justice-involved youth. And because we were data-driven, we could look at our data, just slicing out the justice-involved youth, and we instead said to the funder, we can serve justice-involved youth and meet your target outcomes with our current program. and not create a whole new program with a whole new theory of change.
So we'd like to get you all talking about this. Rather than just go straight to Q&A, we thought we'd start with some share pairs. So please find a person that you did not come here with, so somebody not from your own organization, and spend 2 minutes each sharing an experience you've had with one of the building blocks that Tess talked about, a theory of change or a measurement system. What's your experience been? Could be good, could be bad, could be, I'm not sure yet, I'm having this struggle. Just find a neighbor and go.